You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans. Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am the Jacob Valk, except no imitation. I've got to start with college basketball. We have less than a month left until March Madness. Conference tournaments are going to be starting soon. Obviously, there's no baseball, but college basketball is really filling part of that void. I mean, the Islanders stink. The Nets stink right now. Obviously, there's no football. It's been fun getting into college basketball. And I've got to start with OSU, Illinois. A really impressive win for the Buckeyes. They were down at the half. Granted, only by 1 point, but if you watch that first half, you'll agree with me in saying that the Illini looked like the vastly superior team. It looked like OSU really couldn't get much going. Yeah, they clawed back to make it a respectable halftime deficit, but you had the sense that the opening of the second half would be really important. Which team could slam their fist on the table and say, we're going to take control of this game? The answer? The Buckeyes. They went on a 22-5 run in the first 7.5 minutes or so of the second half. They were up 58-42. You felt really confident in the Buckeyes running away with this game. I mean, they were up 12 with 3.5 minutes left. You're thinking there's no way Illinois is going to come back. Well, Illinois came back. They made some big shots, and before you knew it, this was a 2-point game with less than 2 minutes left. Then OSU woke up. The two teams went back and forth in the final minute or so, trading buckets. But ultimately, it was OSU that went into Champaign and emerged as the victors. Give Malachi Branham credit. He had an excellent game. He had 31 points. E.J. Liddell had 21 points. Kyle Young had 18 points. This is a well-rounded OSU team. I don't think you look at them as a serious March Madness contender, but maybe you should. They're a good team. They've been a good team all year. Chris Holtmann does an excellent job. The biggest issue for them is going to be defense. Can they lock down defensively? Because not for nothing, but if you're up by 12 with 3.5 minutes left in the game, you should not win by only 3 points. You don't need to win by double digits, but to make the deficit overcomable for your opponent, especially a good Illinois team, how's that going to play in March? How's that going to play with the lights on bright? I mean, give Illinois credit. They played a good game. I don't think anyone can be upset about this loss. It was a very well-rounded effort by Illinois. Alfonso Plummer had 26 points. Jacob Grandison, Kofi Coburn, Trent Frazier, and Coleman Hawkins all had at least 10 points. Andre Curbelo wasn't bad coming off the bench. He had 7 points. It's a tough loss for Illinois. This was a winnable game for them, make no mistake about it, but it's not the kind of loss that you can bang your fist on the table over. It's one you would have liked to have won, obviously, but there are some losses that are easier to swallow than others. This was one of those losses. Moving on now to UCLA, Oregon. The Ducks upset the Bruins last night 68-63. This was a big win for Oregon. This helps them a lot as they look to get one of those last few bids into the big dance. You know, I don't watch Oregon as much as I should for obvious reasons, but every time that I watch them, I'm just impressed by them. Obviously, Dana Altman, year in and year out, does a fantastic job with the Ducks. He is their best coach ever. I'd put him over his predecessor, Ernie Kent. But I'll tell you someone else who I like watching, Will Richardson. Richardson came off the bench a lot to start his collegiate career. Then he gained more responsibility as he matured, and now he's one of the best players in the Pac-12. He's putting up 15 points per game, 3.5 rebounds per game, and 3.5 assists per game. He's averaging just under 1.5 steals per game. He's shooting 47% from the field and 40% from beyond the arc. He is a really, really good player. I like watching Richardson play. I think he can turn into a solid NBA player. But he was not the seminal reason that Oregon won yesterday. The seminal reason was Davion Harmon. He had 17 points. Jacob Young had 14 points. Off the bench, Eric Williams had 11 points. Frank Kepnang nearly had a double-double, 8 points and 9 rebounds. And Oregon's defense was absolutely incredible. UCLA shot just 37% from the field and 17% from beyond the arc. Their high men were Tiger Campbell and Cody Riley. They both only had 12 points. It's tough to win a game when your leading scorers only have 12 points each. You know, I don't want to knock UCLA too much for this loss. They probably would have won if Johnny Juzang didn't get hurt. He hurt his ankle. He only played 11 minutes yesterday. It's tough for the Bruins to win when Juzang doesn't play a lot. I mean, you'd like the supporting cast with guys like Jaquez and Bernard and Campbell to step up. Unfortunately, they just couldn't. I mean, this was a tough loss for UCLA. They're a good team this year. You can't take them lightly. I mean, this team was one of the last 4 teams in the Big Dance last year, and they made it all the way to the Final Four. They beat Michigan State, BYU, and Abilene Christian handedly. They knocked off a really good Alabama team. They upset Michigan in the Elite Eight, and they came really close to beating Gonzaga in the Final Four. If not for that magical shot by Jalen Suggs, the iconic moment, who knows what happens in double overtime. I wouldn't be too upset about this loss if I was a UCLA fan. Obviously, the extenuating circumstance with Juzang. And you lost to a good Oregon team. An Oregon team that has a case to make the Big Dance. You know, I'll say this. Bracketology this year, I think, is going to be really, really difficult. You take a look at conferences like the AAC or the ACC, conferences that usually have a lot of teams vying for spots. The AAC really only has like 3 this year: Houston, SMU, and Memphis. And the ACC only has 5: Duke, Notre Dame, the U, UNC, and Wake Forest. So that opens up the door for smaller conferences to get multiple teams in. You think about a conference like the West Coast Conference, I see 5 teams worthy of being in: Gonzaga, St. Mary's, Santa Clara, San Francisco, and BYU. Conference USA has 4 deserving teams: Middle Tennessee, North Texas, UAB, and Louisiana Tech. The Missouri Valley Conference has 3 deserving teams: Loyola, Missouri State, and Drake. I'm not saying all those schools are going to get in, but with conferences like the AAC and the ACC struggling this year, and even a conference like the Big Ten not setting the world on fire. Yes, Wisconsin, Purdue, Illinois, and OSU get in, but are we sure about a school like Rutgers? I know I've said in the past that they're a surefire candidate to get in, but are we sure about that? The more I think about it, the more I'm not sure. Iowa, I'm not sure about. Michigan State has been really disappointing this year. Even the SEC really only has 4 surefire teams going to the Big Dance: Auburn, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Tennessee. How great would it be to see the committee say to these schools from bigger conferences, you don't deserve to be in as much as these schools that had better records than you in smaller conferences. Think about the Ohio Valley Conference. Murray State, Belmont, and Morehead State. Those 3 teams deserve to be in. The Colonial Athletic Association, UNC Wilmington deserves to be in. Towson deserves to be in. I can make an argument for Hofstra and Delaware. It's going to be really interesting to see how it shakes out this year. I think you're going to see a lot of teams from big conferences be omitted from the big dance in favor of smaller schools. And nothing would make me happier than to see that. And while I'm on the subject of the big dance, let me tell you, I've had a tough time thinking about who I think is gonna win it all. I mean, the best team all year has been Gonzaga. I don't think there's a question about that. The thing is, though, Gonzaga historically has underachieved. They're in the big dance every year, but they only have made 2 title games. Obviously, they got their doors blown off by Baylor last year. And in 2017, they lost to an inferior UNC team. All due respect to UNC that year, they were a great team, but were they really as good as Gonzaga? I don't think so. You know, it's tough to pick Gonzaga and be really confident in them. Arizona's gonna get a lot of love this year. And look, I like Arizona. Incredible offense led by some really talented players. Benedict Mathurin, as well as Tubelis, Christian Coloco, and Kerr Krissa. But their defense isn't great. And who's that guy who's going to take over the tournament? Is it Mathurin? Is it Krissa? Who's that guy who's going to step up and say, don't worry, I'm going to lead us to victory today? I don't know if Arizona has a guy like that. I love what Tommy Lloyd has done at Arizona. This is his first year taking over for Sean Miller. And look, under Miller, the Wildcats were not a good March Madness team. They were in it every year, but they never made it out of the Elite Eight. This is a Wildcats team that could go to the Final Four. They are that gifted offensively. But as far as winning the whole thing, I'm not sure. Purdue has a great offense, but a terrible defense. Kansas, same thing. Kentucky's really good, but when are they going to get back to full strength? When is Ty Washington going to come back? When is Severe Wheeler going to come back? I mean, I hate John Calipari, but Kentucky's a team that I could see surprising a lot of people. Health is their biggest issue. You know Duke is going to be motivated to win for Coach K in his last year. But Duke, for a while now, has underachieved. Since winning March Madness in 2015, they haven't made it out of the Elite Eight. It's tough to trust a team like that. Villanova, when they're on, they're unstoppable, but can their offense do enough? It's great to hold a team to under 70 points, but you've still got to score 70 points. Can Nova do that on a consistent basis? I'm not sure. Same thing with a team like Texas Tech. How about Baylor, the defending champs? Without Jonathan Tchamwa, I don't see it. Maybe a team like Providence comes out of nowhere and goes on a big run. A well-rounded team, a team that's been ranked all year, but again, does anyone look at them as a title contender? Probably not. But they're a solid team this year. I feel like the field is wide open this year. There's no team that is head and shoulders better than everyone else. I'm not an Auburn fan. I think they've been overrated all year. I mean, let me tell you, I could see myself picking Murray State to go on a crazy run. I understand that John Morant can't leave the Grizzlies and go back to the Racers, but Matt McMahon's team this year is excellent. Really talented players in KJ Williams, Tevin Brown, and Justice Hill. Their defense is great. It would not surprise me at all if the Racers went on a big run. I feel like the field is just so wide open this year. I think we're going to see a lot of upsets. I think a lot of brackets are going to get blown up after the first round. Part of that could be conferences that no one pays attention to getting multiple bids. You know, let me tell you, schools like North Texas, Mitsu, UAB, and Louisiana Tech are good enough to win a couple games in March. Same thing with schools like Loyola, Drake, and Missouri State. Same thing with schools like Boise State, Wyoming, and Colorado State. I think we're going to have a March Madness full of upsets. And the key to enjoying a March Madness like that is, yes, you fill out your bracket. Yeah, you put some time and effort into it. And maybe you put some money down on it and you get invested in it. But don't let that destroy your enjoyment of the big dance. I know people who get like crazy invested in their bracket, and when they're not on speaking terms anymore, they have a really tough time watching the big dance. As long as you fill out your bracket knowing that odds are you're going to have to draw a lot of lines through some teams, and you're going to see a lot of red. If you know that going into it, it makes enjoying the tournament a lot easier. I mean, isn't that part of what makes college basketball great? The upsets? The fact that a school like UMBC can come out of nowhere and beat a school like Virginia, or a school like UCLA has to go through the first four to make it into the big dance, and then they make it all the way to the final four. Isn't that part of what makes college basketball great? Let's put it this way. There's a reason why the person who knows nothing about college basketball and picks their teams arbitrarily will sometimes have a better bracket than someone who watches all the games and dives into it hardcore and just puts a lot of time and effort into filling out the bracket. The reason that happens is because any team can be better than any other team on any given day of the week. And when you have a setup like March Madness, one loss and you're out, that makes for big upsets. I'll say this. I really hope that the selection committee does the right thing and puts in multiple teams from smaller conferences that clearly deserve it. You can't tell me that schools like San Francisco and BYU and Santa Clara don't deserve to be in the big dance. And I want to see those schools in over borderline schools from bigger conferences like Alabama or Michigan State or TCU or Iowa State or something like that. The committee needs to do the right thing and not be beholden to the majesty of bigger conferences, because those bigger conferences haven't lived up to that majesty. Alright, now I'll give you some NHL Valk talk. And I'll start with an interesting report from Frank Saravalli of Daily Faceoff. According to him, the Blue Jackets have been taking calls about trading Alexander Texier. Before I get into anything, let me just say that the Blue Jackets are out of the playoff race this year. They are 9 points behind the Bruins. The Eastern Conference is set. The 8 teams that are currently in the playoffs, the Panthers, Lightning, Leafs, Hurricanes, Rangers, Penguins, Capitals, and Bruins, are going to be the 8 teams in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So if you're a team like the Blue Jackets, the Red Wings, the Islanders, the Senators, etc., you've got to realize that you're playing for draft picks at this point. The Western Conference is wide open. The Oilers, Stars, Ducks, and Canucks are still very much in the mix. The Jets and Sharks are on the outside looking in. It's going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out. But with the Blue Jackets being out of the playoff mix this year, that opens up the possibility that they could trade a guy like Texier. Someone who would be incredibly appealing to a playoff team. Look, it took him a while to really get going in the NHL, but this year he's putting it all together. He has 11 goals and 20 points in 36 games. His defensive play is vastly improved. He's really young. He's 22. And he's not a rental. He's under contract for next year. And the year after that, he'll be an RFA. So if you trade for Texier, you can have him as part of your team for a while. Now, with that being said, that also means the Blue Jackets don't need to trade him. Saravalli said that the Blue Jackets' asking price is incredibly high. A first rounder and a roster player. Yeah, that is correct. That is exactly how I would value Texier. If a team is going to give you an arm and a leg for a player that really only has one good season under his belt, and the jury is still kind of out on, you can think that Texier is going to work out. That's all well and good. I think he has a good future ahead of him too, but in all fairness, the jury is still out. I don't think you can confidently slam your fist on the table one way or the other about him. You know, if a team is willing to give up an arm and a leg for a guy like that, yeah, I have no problem trading him. The thing is, though, you don't need to trade him. No one will fault the Blue Jackets for letting this play out a little bit longer. Here's my question about the Blue Jackets. What are they going to do about Patrick Laine and Max Domi? Jack Roslovic, too. I mean, the Blue Jackets have the cap space necessary to re-sign all those guys. They're going to have oodles and oodles of cap space next year. Easily over $30 million. Easily. But how much are you willing to pay for a guy like Laine? Someone who, I don't want to say has struggled since coming to the Blue Jackets, but certainly hasn't gotten you to where you want to go. How about Max Domi? A good player, only 26, but is on his third team in 7 seasons. You know, that does concern me a little bit. Even a guy like Roslovic, is he ever gonna reach his full potential? The Blue Jackets have some tough decisions to make. I mean, make no mistake about it. The trade deadline is in less than a month. If the Blue Jackets said that they're open to trading Laine, Domi, and Roslovic, they would get a ton of offers. But you also couldn't begrudge them for saying, yeah, we're going to keep Laine, he's an RFA, same thing with Roslovic, and we think that we can convince Max Domi to stay. The Blue Jackets are going to be an interesting team to watch as we get closer to the trade deadline. Moving on now to a report from Pierre LeBrun of TSN saying that the Kraken are going to explore the trade market for their first ever captain, Mark Giordano. And it only makes sense that Ron Francis would look to move Giordano. Here's a guy who Kraken fans thought could really help them make a big playoff push this year, just like the Golden Knights did their first year in the NHL. Instead, it really hasn't worked out. The Kraken are a really bad team this year. No one there has 35 points. Philip Grubauer has really struggled. Chris Drieger has really struggled. It's been really, really tough. So it makes no sense to keep Giordano, someone who's on the last year of his deal, someone whose focus now isn't on money. He's already gotten some big boy contracts. He wants to win. Giordano has never made it out of the first round in his NHL career. Here's a guy who won a Norris Trophy in 2019. He's a 3-time All-Star. One of the better defensemen of this era. The fact that he has no playoff success, much like his former teammate Jerome McGinley, that's sad. That needs to be corrected very quickly. Let me tell you, if you're a playoff team and you're looking to beef up your blue line, you could do a lot worse than Mark Giordano. A really good two-way defenseman. Don't let his -20 fool you. The Kraken are just dreadful this year. He has 23 points in 48 games. Great veteran presence to have. Not afraid to throw his body around when he needs to. You can put Giordano on your second defensive pair and be very happy about it if you're part of a playoff team. You know, quite honestly, I wouldn't even be upset if a team gave up a first rounder for Giordano. He's that good. He can help a playoff team that much. I understand he's 38 and you're not going to have him for an incredibly long time, but he can really help you go on a big run this year. He is talented enough to warrant a first rounder. He's that good. So if you can get something like that, if you're the Kraken and you're in the midst of a lost season, why wouldn't you do it? It only makes sense to trade Giordano. And I'll say this, I've had people ask me why the Kraken are so bad this year when the Golden Knights were the second best team in hockey their first year. I mean, I picked the Kraken to make the playoffs this year. They're the third worst team in hockey. Well, there's really a simple explanation. Teams got smart. Think back to how poorly some of those teams managed the expansion draft. The Panthers were more than willing to trade Riley Smith so that the Golden Knights would take Jonathan Marchessault. Smith was on a big contract. The Panthers wanted to get rid of him. So to help get Smith off the books, they said, you can have Jonathan Marchessault and see if you can fix his defensive game. Yes, he's a 30-goal scorer, but he was a dreadful defensive player that year. He was a minus 21. Jonathan Marchessault had 75 points for the Golden Knights, their first year of existence. Riley Smith had 60. The Panthers couldn't wait to get rid of those two guys. The Blue Jackets left William Karlsson unprotected. He had 78 points with the Golden Knights in their first year of existence. The Blues left David Perron unprotected. He had 66 points for the Knights that year. The Wild couldn't wait to get rid of Erik Haula and Alex Tuch. Tuch had 37 points in the first year of Golden Knights hockey and helped enable Vegas to get Jack Eichel. Meanwhile, Erik Haula nearly had 30 goals. He had 55 points. I can go further. James Neal was unprotected by the Predators. Colin Miller was unprotected by the Bruins. The Penguins made the conscious decision to move on from Marc-Andre Fleury to roll with Matt Murray. The move made sense at the time, but in the long run, didn't work out for the Penguins. Teams did an extremely terrible job of evaluating their own players in 2017. The New York Islanders gave up an arm and a leg so that Vegas wouldn't take anyone off their roster. The Knights took J.F. Berube. He never played a game for the Knights. Garth Snow was so convinced that his team could win that he was willing to give up a first and second rounder so that the Islanders would stay intact. The Islanders missed the playoffs that year. I understand that some teams were in cap hell. I understand that some teams were in really bad situations. But the Golden Knights were able to build a Stanley Cup contender with spare parts. And think about this for a minute. Every year that the Golden Knights have been in existence, they've made the playoffs. And that will probably continue this year. Teams learned from their mistakes previously. The Golden Knights made a ton of trades prior to the expansion draft. The Kraken made none. I'm sure they wanted to, but no team wanted to play ball. So because of that, you were forced to take a lot of the scraps. Good players, but no one who's really stepped up. The Golden Knights' best player this year has probably been Jordan Eberle. Either him or Jared McCann. You're not going to win when Jordan Eberle or Jared McCann is your best player. I mean, the Kraken made a concerted effort to be aggressive in free agency. They signed Philip Grubauer, they signed Jaden Schwartz. They signed Alexander Wenberg. Hasn't really worked out. Teams got smarter. You want to take Adam Larson and give him a big contract? Knock yourself out. You want to take Jamie Oleksiak and sign him to a big contract? Knock yourself out. Teams got better at evaluating their own players. Instead of putting themselves in positions where they could make egregious mistakes, like the Panthers and Blue Jackets did, those teams said, you know what? We're going to let you make those mistakes. In 2017, teams were really afraid of making mistakes. Last year, they weren't. And you know what? With the exception of the New York Islanders, every team is laughing right now. The Islanders should have protected Eberle. Okay, it's just that simple. You keep Eberle. You don't need to re-sign Kyle Palmieri. It's really simple. You could have left a guy like Anthony Beauvillier unprotected, or Cal Clutterbuck, or Matt Martin. Instead, you left Jordan Eberle unprotected. Great job, Lou Lamoriello. Only one team messed up twice in these expansion drafts. The New York Islanders. And that's indisputable. Isn't it fun to be an Islanders fan? No. No, it's not. Alright, now I'll give you some NFL Valk talk. Specifically on the Panthers re-signing Ian Thomas to a 3-year deal worth $16,950,000. That's $5.65 million per year. And we have an early contender for worst move of the offseason. Who was in a rush to give Ian Thomas $5 million per year? Why would anyone want to give Ian Thomas $5 million per year? Ian Thomas isn't a good receiving tight end. With the exception of his rookie year, he has never had more than 200 receiving yards in a season. He has never had more than 20 catches in a season. In his 4 years in the NFL, he only has 4 touchdowns. You want to tell me he's a good blocking tight end? Yeah, he's not bad. But blocking tight ends shouldn't get $5 million per year. I can find blocking tight ends in the draft. I can find blocking tight ends off the street. You want to tell me Thomas is young? Yeah, he is. He's going to be 26 when the season gets underway. That doesn't mean you give him over $5 million per year. Look, no one hates Sam Darnold more than me. I think he's a terrible football player. But there's no question that there's no player in NFL history that has been supported worse than him. The Le'Veon Bell fiasco, the Adam Gase fiasco, Matt Rule isn't setting the world on fire, Joe Brady proved to be in over his head. I could have told you that would happen. Now Ben McAdoo is his offensive coordinator. You gotta feel bad for Darnold a little bit. He has been supported terribly. And this move is another instance of that. Terrible job by the Panthers. I don't get it at all. I'll close this show out by talking about a death in the NFL world, and that is the passing of Ken Burrow, who died yesterday at the age of 73. Ken Burrow was, without question, one of the best wide receivers of the 1970s. He's right up there with Charlie Joyner. He's right up there with Drew Pearson. He's right up there with Fred Biletnikoff. In fact, you can make an argument that he's better than all those guys. From 1970 to 1979. So we're talking about the entire 1970s. Only one player had more receiving yards than Ken Burrow. You know who it was? Harold Jackson. Former Eagle, Ram, and Patriot Harold Jackson. I mean, I'll tell you, you can make a really strong argument for Ken Burrow to be in the Hall of Fame. If we look at dominance for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and we do, alright, for football, that's like the only way you could do it sometimes. There were very few wide receivers more dominant than Ken Burrow. It's just that simple. He was drafted by the New Orleans Saints with the 10th overall pick in the 1970 NFL Draft out of Texas Southern. Burrow got hurt his rookie year, really didn't set the world on fire. The Saints were in flux anyway, so they decided to give up on Burrow after just 1 year. He was traded to the Houston Oilers along with Dave Rowe for Hoyle Granger, Terry Stopel, Charles Blossom, and a draft pick. That trade is without question one of the worst moves in Saints franchise history. Because Burrow, while he didn't flourish right away, would eventually turn into a great player. Now, he had the misfortune when he first got to the Oilers of playing for some terrible coaches. Bill Peterson, who made the leap from college to the NFL, is widely regarded as one of the worst head coaches in NFL history. That is a correct evaluation of him. And the guy who replaced him, Sid Gilman, while he did a great job for the Chargers in the AFL, just really couldn't work the same magic in the NFL. Then in 1975, the Oilers' fortunes changed when they hired Bum Phillips. Kind of a weird hire at the time. He was their defensive coordinator in 1974, but the Oilers only went 7-7 that year. Their defense really wasn't anything special. They had some good players in Ted Washington, Tody Smith, Bob Atkins, and Elvin Buffet, but still, not a great defense. But when Phillips took over, everything changed for the Oilers. They went 10-4, and Burrow started his journey to, let's be fair, greatness. He had 53 catches for 1,063 yards and 8 touchdowns. He made the Pro Bowl that year, and he led the NFL in receiving yards that year. In 76, he had 51 catches for 932 yards and 7 touchdowns. In 77, he made his second Pro Bowl and was a second-team All-Pro. He had 43 catches for 816 yards and 8 touchdowns. He was a game wrecker. Once he got in the open field, there was no stopping him. He didn't make the playoffs until 1978. In 78 and 79, the Oilers made it all the way to the AFC title game. Burrow was by far and away the best pass catcher on those teams. But in both those years, they lost to the Steelers. In 78, they got destroyed 34-5. And in 79, they had a more respectable loss, but still a loss, 27-13. In 1980, they did make the playoffs again, but they lost in the wild card round to the Raiders, 27-7. But Burrow had gotten hurt that year. He came back in 81 and wasn't bad. He had 40 catches for 668 yards and 7 touchdowns. But by then it was clear that the Oilers were going in a different direction. Bum Phillips left for the Saints. Ed Biles took over as their head coach and did an absolutely terrible job. Dan Pastorini was gone. He was replaced by a past his prime Ken Stabler. It was just a bad time to be an Oilers fan. So Burrow retired after that season. And it's kind of funny if you stop and think about it. The Houston Oilers had a stretch from 1971 to 1985 where they just went through terrible coaches, with the exception of Bum Phillips. Because Bum Phillips did a great job for the Oilers. But think about the other guys who were there in that time frame. Ed Hughes, Bill Peterson, Sid Gilman, Ed Biles, Chuck Studley, and Hugh Campbell. Those are 6 really bad coaches. Again, nothing against Gilman, he's a Hall of Famer, but he did a terrible job with the Oilers. It's just that simple. It's a shame that Burrow wasn't put in a better position to succeed. If Phillips had become head coach of the Oilers a little earlier, who knows what would have happened? Maybe Burrow gets a ring. Maybe that catapults him into the Hall of Fame. Regardless, I can make a very strong argument for Burrow to be a Hall of Famer right now. Like I said, second most receiving yards in the 1970s. That's impressive. May he rest in peace. You'll get a New York Islanders show on Monday night. Regular episodes of the Jacob Valk Show come your way every weekday afternoon. Until next time, I'm Jacob Valk, and always remember, if you disagree with me, You're wrong.